This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Parshas Yisro. Now, Parshas Yisro really has two parts, and one of the prominent parts of Parshas Yisro, the prominent part of the entire Torah, is the actual giving of the Torah and the Aseres HaDibros, and that begins in the middle of the Parsha with the words "B'chodesh Hashlishi" in the third month. And it's quite interesting that very rarely, almost nowhere, do we find that a episode begins without the letter Vav. Whenever you have a Parsha always begins with the letter Vav. Let's say, going back to Miketz, Vayihi, Miketz, right? Vayihi, Vayigash Elav Yehuda, Vayichi, Shemais, Ve'ela, Shemais, Va'era, Vayidaber Lekim El Moshe, Boy, Vayemer Hashem El Moshe, B'Shalach, Vayihi. A Parsha always begins with the letter Vav. That's just the way it works, because one Parsha is a continuation from the Parsha before. In fact, especially when you're dealing with a date on the calendar, a Jewish date, it never omits the letter Vav. Whenever it says a date, it always says U'vachodesh Harishain, U'vachodesh Hashavi, U'vachodesh Hasiri. It always says U. Or it says Vayehi, Vayom Hasheni, Vayehi, Vayom Hashishi. Whenever we give a date in the Chumash, it always begins with the letter Vav, and there's only one exception. This week's Parsha, B'chodesh Hashlishi, in the third month, right? Haloi Davarhu. There has to be a reason for it. Why does the inyan of the giving of the Torah, the inyan of the Aseres HaDibros, why does this topic begin with the letter Beis? And it's almost reminiscent of another Parsha that begins with the letter Beis, and that is Gracious. So what exactly is the connection between the giving of the Aseres HaDibros and Bereshis? So this is a point that is raised by the Meshech Chachma in this week's Parsha that we will soon come back to. Okay, we begin with the Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara in Chulin, Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, says the following. There was a great man by the name of Reb Pinchas ben Yair. Anybody know who Reb Pinchas ben Yair was? Well, the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis says Reb Pinchas ben Yair was none other than the son-in-law of Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Yeah? By the way, the Zohar disagrees. The Zohar says he was the father-in-law of Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Okay, but be that as it may, the Gemara in Chulin tells us the following story. Let's take a look at it inside. The Reb Pinchas ben Yair have a ka'azal lepidyon shvui. Reb Pinchas ben Yair was going to redeem captives. By the way, Reb Pinchas ben Yair was a big expert. He was very proficient. He excelled in the mitzvah pidyon shvuyim, redeeming captives. Pagabe beginoi nahara. He meets up, he bumps into the river Ginoi, so he has a problem. He can't cross the river. He can't get across the river. The river's in his way. So, what does Reb Pinchas ben Yair do? Amar le Ginoi chaloik li meimecha. He says to the river, split for me, ve'everbach, and I'll cross you. Right? Who talks to rivers? Pinchas ben Yair. He talks to the river, he says, split? What happened? He says, so the river says to Pinchas ben Yair, what are you talking about? I should split for you? He says like this, the river says, Amarle, Ata hilech lases ritzayin kainach. You're going to do the will of your creator. I'm also going to do the will of my creator. Right? We're both going to do a mission. My mission is, the river says, to flow. Your mission is to redeem captives. Ata safek oisa, safek yata oisa. Ani vade oisa. The river says to Pinchas ben Yair, you can't be certain you'll be successful in your mission. Maybe you won't have enough money to redeem the captive. Maybe the terrorists will kill the ones they captured. You never know. You may not be successful. But the river says, I will definitely be successful. If I do my mission and flow, I will most certainly be successful. So Pinchas ben Yair got upset. He said, Amar, he said, if you don't split for me, Goizrani alecha, I will decree against you, Shalayavru b'cha mayim la'olam, that you will dry up forever. You will never have an ounce of water in your banks. So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says, if you don't split for me right now, that's the end of you. You will never have any water again. So what did the river do? It split, right? Chalakli, it split. The Gemara continues, there was another guy with Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, and he was on his way carrying wheat on his shoulders to bake matzah, to eat together with the Karim Pesach. And Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair says to the river, while you're at it, and you're splitting for me, why don't you split for this guy, you know? Anyway, he's going to do a mitzvah, so split for him also. So what did the river do? It learned its lesson, doesn't want to start up with her Pinchas ben Yair. The river split. Then, listen to this. There was a third guy there. There was an Arab. And the Arab is accompanying them. You know, he's their bodyguard, he's their scout. And the Pinchas ben Yair said, you know what? Why don't you split for the Arab also? Because what are people going to say? That we don't treat our, bodyguards well, we don't treat those who accompany us well? Says the Gemara, the river split again for the Arab. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, Kama Nafish, Gavra, Mi Moshe, Veshitin Riban. This man, Pinchas ben Yair, is greater than Moshe Rabbeinu and 600,000 Jews. Why? Because this man was able to split the river 3 times, and Moshe Rabbeinu was only able to split it once. Concludes it, and the Gemara asks, who says he split it 3 times? Maybe it split 1 time? So the Gemara concludes the following. Pinchas ben Yair was equal to Moshe Rabbeinu and 600,000 Jews. I mean, you gotta be kidding me. Pinchas ben Yair was equal to 600,000 Jews? And Moshe Rabbeinu? That's, we believe, like, Moshe. Nobody ever was like Moshe Rabbeinu. How could the Gemara say such a thing? That Pinchas ben Yair was able to equal Moshe Rabbeinu, but that's what the Gemara says. He was able to accomplish a feat that it took Moshe and 600,000 Jews. Now, let's think about this a little bit more. Was it easy for Moshe Rabbeinu to split the Yam Suf? No. The Yam Suf put up a fuss. When Moshe says split, what does the Yam Suf say? Yam Suf, get lost, Moshe. I'm older than you. I was created on the 3rd day. You were created on the 6th day, and I'm not splitting for you. And what happened? It wasn't splitting. Until what happened? Until a man by the name of Nachshon ben Aminadav, he jumps in. And does the Yam Suf split? No. So Nachshon ben Aminadav, he walks in up to his knees. Does the Yam Suf split? No. He walks down up to his waist. Yam Suf doesn't split. He walks up to his neck, up until his mouth. And then Nachshon ben Aminadav cries out, Hoishieni, save me, God. Ki bo mayim nafesh, the water has reached my soul. And then does the Yam split? No. It has to see the coffin of Yosef. And according to the Medrash Pli, it has to see a brisa of Rabbi Shmuel. And only then, after all of these, twistings and turnings and persuasions by Moshe, by Nachshon, by the brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, by the Aron, by the coffin of Yosef HaTzadik, only then does the Yam Suf split. And here you have Pinchas ben Yair. He walks over to the river and he says, listen, river, you better split now, otherwise that's the end of you. And what does the river do? It splits. So, what's going on? Pinchas really had this down pat. He had this down to a science. Moshe Rabbeinu, it was a very long, arduous process for Moshe Rabbeinu. Pinchas ben Yair, for him to perform a miracle, it's like drinking a cup of coffee. It almost sounds like, for Pinchas ben Yair to perform a miracle, it would be like us, putting $1 into a soda machine and getting a free spray, getting a spray. 3 times, not only for himself, not only for the guy baking the matzahs, he was able to split the river for some Arab. How do we understand this? So we begin with an amazing Orach Chaim HaKadosh in Parshas B'Shalach. And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says the following. We are familiar with the concept that when when Moshe Rabbeinu split the Yam Suf, it wasn't that at that moment in time Hashem said split, but rather it was more than that. When Hashem created the Yam Suf, He made a stipulation with the Yam Suf that the Yam Suf needs to split when Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the Yam. Says Orach Chaim HaKadosh, not only that, not only did Hashem make a stipulation with the Yam Suf that the Yam Suf should split when Moshe comes, Hashem stipulated with the Yam that it should split any time a tzaddik needs it to. In other words, this concept that God stipulated with nature, it's not that He only stipulated that nature should be subject to Moshe Rabbeinu. God stipulated with nature that nature should be subservient and subject to those who learn Torah. Now listen to this. There's a pasuk in Sefer Yeshayahu, in Parak Mem Gimel, it says the following. V'yata koyamar Hashem Bayracha Yaakov. So says God, your creator, Yaakov, Hashem is addressing Yaakov Avinu. Says the Medrash, it could be read differently. Bayracha, who's the creator of the universe? Yaakov Avinu. Now it sounds blasphemous. Sounds heretical. But that's what the Medrash says. God says to Yaakov, I can consider you a creator. Says our Chaim Kosh, what does this mean? What does this mean? How could we consider Yaakov Avinu a creator? Says our Chaim HaKadosh, nature, yes, nature has certain rules and regulations that can't be broken. But there is someone who is above nature. Talmidei Chachamim control nature. Now, we're not talking about, your local Orthodox rabbi over here. We're talking about the Gedolei Hadar, and not specifically this generation, of earlier generations. Someone like Yaakov Avinu has full control over nature. Yaakov Avinu comes to Har Abayis, the sun sets for him. Yaakov Avinu comes to Shechem, the sun rises for him. Yaakov Avinu is in complete mastery of nature. Now listen to this, says Archaim HaKadosh. As great as Moshe Rabbeinu was, and as great as Yaakov Avinu was, they were lacking in their control over nature. Why? Because the Torah wasn't given yet. But after the Torah was given, the Talmidei Chachamim of the Nevi'im, the Tanoim, the Amoram, had more control over the Bria, over nature, over the world, than, say, Moshe Rabbeinu himself before the Torah was given. This is an amazing concept. That the giving of the Torah was not just the giving of information and the giving of a document. The Torah includes in it the dominion over this world. And when God gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael, to Yaakov, to Klal Yisrael, they control nature. Says our Chaim HaKadosh. You know why it was hard for Moshe to split the Yam? The Yam says to Moshe, Moshe, I am older than you. I was created on the third day. You were created on the sixth day. If you would have been a Ben Torah, if you would have received the Torah was created even before creation. Anybody know how long the Torah existed before the world was created? 974 generations, right? The Torah was given Davar Tziva Elef Dar. The Torah is commanded in the 1000th generation. Now we know there are 26 generations from Adam until Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Torah was given in the 1000th generation, 974 generations before the world was created. Says our Chaim HaKadosh, it was easier for Pinchas ben Yair to split the sea than it was for Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was up against tremendous opposition. He had to break the laws of nature. He can't break the laws of nature. Nature has certain immutable laws that can't be changed. But after the Torah was given, the Torah is like the remote control over the world. Yeah? If a tzaddik says to the sun, set, it sets. Again, we'll have to see what kind of tzaddikim we're talking about. If the tzaddik says to the moon, disappear, it's gone. If the tzaddik says, you're dead, you're dead. Tzaddik says you're alive, that's it. And we'll see countless examples of that in the Gemara. And we'll talk about that. So says our...
How did it happen to Yaakov Avinu then?
What? Yaakov Avinu? It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And it didn't happen often. We only find 2 instances. Okay. This is the tremendous, innovative concept of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. With this, we can answer the following question. If you remember, when Eliezer is looking for a shidduch for Rivka, so he goes to Aram Naharayan, he gets there, he takes his camels. What does he do to the camels? Vayefatach, he opens up the muzzle. Says Rashi, and what were the camels doing until now? Says Rashi, they were muzzled. Why were they muzzled? So they don't go and graze in someone else's field, right? Because it would be gezela. Ask the Ramban, that's ludicrous. Why would Yaakov have to muzzle his camels? Says the Ramban, there was a man by the name of Pinchas ben Yair. You know what Pinchas ben Yair? He had a donkey. Now this donkey was a bigger tzaddik than probably any tzaddik that you know. Right? If you tell a big tzaddik, you're almost like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, it's a big compliment. Okay? Well, I'll tell you about the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair. The Gemara in Chulin, later on, Daf Zayin says, that Pinchas ben Yair once went to an inn, and the innkeeper gave the donkey food that Trumos Amaisis was not taken off, and Pinchas ben Yair's donkey wouldn't touch it. Right? So imagine, an animal. Imagine if, a restaurant threw out some extra food into the backyard, and a pigeon came along and said, "I'm not eating that. Is it under the vad?" Right? That's what the donkey said. The donkey said, who's the mashgiach? The donkey would not eat the food. So says the Ramban, if Pinchas ben Yair's donkeys were so frum that they would not eat tevel, so you think Avraham Avinu needed to muzzle his donkey? I mean, if Pinchas ben Yair's donkeys took on the righteousness of their owner, so certainly the camels of Avraham Avinu should be at least a big tzaddikim as the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair. So therefore the Ramban says it's ludicrous to say that Avraham Avinu had to muzzle his donkey, his camels. Why would he have to muzzle his camels? If a camel of Avraham Avinu, that's a frum camel, a very erlicha camel. That camel's not going to steal. I mean, Pinchas ben Yair's donkey is not going to eat tevel, so certainly, who's greater, Avraham or Pinchas ben Yair? Says Ramban, Avraham is definitely greater than Pinchas ben Yair. So if Avraham is greater, why in the world would Avraham have to muzzle his donkey? But Rabbi said, based on the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, you can answer very simply. Avraham Avinu was certainly greater than Pinchas ben Yair. But Avraham Avinu was before the Torah was given. Before the Torah was given, nature was not subject to the tzaddikim. The tzaddikim did not have mastery over the bria. So just because Avraham Avinu was a big tzaddik, it doesn't mean his camels were big tzaddikim. But Pinchas ben Yair was after the Torah was given. After the Torah was given, the tzaddikei hadar control the world. So if they control the world, their camels are not going to eat anything problematic. Okay, now listen to this. There's a pasuk in Shiur HaShirim that says the following: Lissusasi b'rechvei paroi dimisich rayasi. Right? God is speaking to His beloved, and He's saying to His beloved. By the way, who's God's beloved? Us, Bnei Yisrael. And He's saying, Lissusasi b'rechvei paroi dimisich. Imagine you go home tonight, and you say to your wife, my dear, I love you so much. To me, you're like a horse. Right? So your wife would say, tomorrow night you're having hay for supper, right? That's what the Rebbe tells Klal Yisrael. To me, you're like a horse. I mean, with compliments like that. That's what Hashem tells us. That my dear Bnei Yisrael, you're like horses to me. So what's Hashem talking about? Says the Nefesh HaChaim, Hashem didn't say we're like any horse. We're like the horses of Parai. What was so special about the horses of Parai? The horses of Parai had a mind of their own. You see, Parai and his cohorts, they were debating, should we go into the Yam, should we not go into the Yam, should we run after Bnei Yisrael, should we not run after Bnei Yisrael? The horses just ran headlong into the sea. Even though, the guys on the horses were pulling back, no, don't go in. The horses had a mind of their own, they ran straight into the sea. So even though there was a rider, the rider almost was powerless. Everything was controlled by the horse. Says the Nefesh HaChaim in the Sefer Ruach, in the Nefesh HaChaim. Nefesh HaChaim says, that is what God tells us. Even though I am the rider, I am Roichev Shamayim B'Yazrecha, I'm the rider. Says Hashem, don't think I control the world. No, I don't. You hear this? It's hard to digest when you're digesting other things. But listen what the Nefesh HaChaim is saying. Nefesh HaChaim says, God says, even though I'm the rider, don't think I control the world. I don't. You control the world. You control how I direct the world. The weather? You think Hashem wakes up in the morning, today will be cold, today will be... No. Hashem looks, how did he daven yesterday? How did he speak to his friend yesterday? How did he perform mitzvahs? And based on that, Hashem controls the weather. Hashem doesn't say, okay, today's stock goes up 100, tomorrow down 50. No, it's not arbitrary. Hashem says, it's up to you. What you do controls how I run the world. God is the rider, but we're the horses. Not like any horse. We're like the horses in Paro's chariot, okay? As hard to understand as this is, and as difficult to absorb as it, this is the truth. This is what the pasuk means. Lissusasi berechvei paroi dimisich rayasi. This world, yes, God ultimately controls it, but He allows Himself to be affected by our actions. And Nefesh HaChaim says there are countless Gemaras. The Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Tazayin, Kuf Lamed Aleph, the Gemara in Yevamis, Daf Hey, Menachos Samach Dalet, that says, Avodat Tzarech Gavaya. God needs our service. What does that mean, God needs our service? He needs our service to act in this world. The way God displays himself, controls this world, is totally dependent on us. Rav Shach also is troubled by this question. Again, the question is, why was it that Moshe Rabbeinu, he comes to the Yam, and he has to show the Yam the coffin of Yosef, and he has to tell Nachshon and Aminadav to jump in. It's very difficult for Moshe Rabbeinu to split the Yam Suf, and Pinchas ben Yair just, says a few magic words. He says, split now, otherwise that's the end of you, and the Yam Suf splits. Says Rav Shach, the exact same thing as the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, but listen to how he says it. The Medrash tells us, it's the Medrash in Shemais Rabbah, Lamed Gimel Zayin. The Medrash says the following. The Medrash contrasts before the giving of the Torah to after the giving of the Torah. Says the Medrash, before God gave the Torah to Klal Yisrael, it says, Moshe Olo Elohim. Think about it. Where did Moshe have to get the Torah? He goes up to Shamayim, right? In other words, God is the boss, so to speak. He is in the heavens. Moshe goes to God. That's before the Torah is given. After the Torah is given, says the Medrash, Hashem says, now you're the boss. Now I come to you. Like the Pasuk says, V'yasu li mikdash, v'shachanti b'seicham. God says, you make for me the house, I'll come to your house. Before the Torah was given, the Medrash says, we had to go up to the heaven to get the Torah. We had to go to Hashem. Hashem's the boss. Hashem sits in his place, right? When you want something from an important person, you don't say, excuse me, boss, meet me in my office in 10 minutes. So the boss will be in your office in 10 minutes and he'll tell you, go take a hike, your job is over, right? You don't summon the boss to your office. So Hashem says when the Torah was given, what happened? Moshe went up to Hashem. After the Torah was given, says the Medrash, God came down to this world and he says, I live in your house. Says Rav Shach, even though we can't explain such a thing, we have no words to explain this idea, this is the reality. The reality is that when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, the reins of the universe, the keys of the universe, the controls of the universe were given over to those people who are immersed in Torah. Says Rav Shach, that's the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu had a tough time splitting the Yam Suf, and Rav Pinchas ben Yair had an easy time splitting the Yam Suf. That's the explanation. That's the explanation. In fact, even the Nefesh HaChaim adds an amazing idea. The Nefesh HaChaim writes in Ruach Chaim that even today, the Torah still has the full capacity to change nature. And he tells a story. Now, I'm not familiar with any other instance where the Nefesh HaChaim writes a story in his commentaries. Nefesh HaChaim was the primary disciple of the Vilna Gaon. He wasn't a Hasidic Rebbe. He didn't say over Maisalach. As far as I know, this is the only story that appears in the writings of Reb Chaim. And he says the following. One of the greatest of all the Achronim was the Taz. Right? If you open up any Shulchan Aruch, you see on the side of the Shulchan Aruch the Taz. And one time, a woman comes to the Taz. The Taz had just finished giving his shiur. And the woman says to the Taz, Rabbeinu David, help me, my son is deathly ill. So the Taz says, Hasachas Elokim Anochi, am I in the place of God? I'm very sorry. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a miracle worker. What do you want me to do? So the woman says, I'm not coming to you. I'm coming to the Torah that you learn. So the Taz says, if that's the case, he says to the woman, I give over to this child the Torah that I just learned with my Talmidim, and it should be as a chus for him. Says the Nefesh HaChaim, at that moment, the child's fever broke, and the child was revived. Says the Nefesh HaChaim, this is not just a story, this is the reality of the Torah. The Torah controls the universe. The Torah controls nature. And what it was difficult for Moshe Rabbeinu to do, it was easy for Reb Pinchas ben Yair. Okay. In fact, we find a similar idea in Parshas Vayera. The beginning of Vayera, the pasuk says, "Vayera elav Hashem Elonei Mamre," that God appeared to Avram Avinu in Elonei Mamre. V'hu Yoshev Pesach Ha'oyel K'chamayah. Avram Avinu is sitting. Avram is sitting down. The word Yoshev is spelled without a vav. It's spelled Yashav. In other words, he sat, which Rashi interprets to mean Avram Avinu wanted to stand. Hashem said, no, sit. And you're sitting, and my standing will be a predecessor, will be a paradigm, will be the pre-enactment of how I will conduct myself by the Jewish court cases. Because we have a rule, Elohim Nitzav Ba'adas Kael. God stands in the convening of the judges. Which means the following, if you see a bunch of people sitting around the table, and you see near them people standing, so which people are the important people, and which people are the secondary people? The people sitting, they're the ones deciding on the matter. They're the ones convening on the matter. The people standing, they're watching, they're learning, they're observing. So if you go to a courtroom and you see judges sitting around and you see people standing behind them, the judges are sitting, the people standing behind them, they're the students, they're the observers. Fine. Says Rebbeinu Shalom, an amazing thing. When the Jewish courts convene, they will sit and I will stand. You know why? Because I am powerless to decide the halacha. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, whatever the Chachamim say, they say mutter, it's permitted even if God himself thinks it's asur. They say asur, they say it's prohibited. It's prohibited even if God thinks it's permitted. God says, I am secondary to you. You're sitting and I'm standing. Avram Avinu is sitting, Hashem says sit. And this will be the pre-enactment of God's role in the Jewish court system. So this is another example that almost, so to speak, we have been given, God gave us over. When He gave us the Torah, He didn't just give us a document, He gave us control over this world. That's what the pasuk means, Bayracha Yaakov. Yaakov Avinu is in a way a creator. In fact, if you look in the Medrash that the Ohr HaChaim quotes, if you look again in number 2, there's a Medrash that says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu La'ilamai Mi Baracha. God says to the world, who created you? Mi Yitzrecha, who fashions you? Yisrael. Yisrael. We are the creators of the world. Another illustration, very interesting. There's another time that a sea split. Besides Moshe Rabbeinu, besides Pinchas ben Yair, there's another instance in the Torah that the sea split.
Yaakov.
The Yarden. By the times of Yoshua ben Nun. Yoshua ben Nun is about to go into Eretz Yisrael. He dries up the Yarden. If anybody's familiar with the Sefer Yoshua, they'll know. How did the Yarden split? Well, the Navi says explicitly, the Kohanim came in, they stuck in their feet, and the pasuk says, as soon as the Kohanim stuck their feet into the Yarden, bam, the Yarden split. There was no argument. There was no fuss. The Yarden didn't say, ha, I'm older than you. The Yarden didn't say, let someone jump in up to their nose. The Yarden didn't say, let me see a nice coffin. The Yarden didn't say, let me see a good brisa. No, the Yarden split. So as for B'Cheskel Abramsky, how's that possible? It splits for the Talmud Yehoshua ben Nun, and it doesn't split for the Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. For Moshe Rabbeinu, the Yam Suf is, stubborn like a mule. Right? Not like the mule of Rav Pinchas ben Yair, like a regular mule. For the Yam Suf, for Moshe doesn't want to split. And the Yarden for Yehoshua ben Nun, the Yarden splits? Says Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, yeah, of course. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to split the Yam Suf before the Torah was given. Before the Torah was given, you want to break nature? No. Only God rules over nature before the Torah was given. After the Torah was given, the Yam Suf can't say anything. Yehoshua ben Nun has a Torah. He comes to the Yarden with the Aron. Inside the Aron is a Torah. The Yam Suf says, I'm getting out of here. Because, I'll split one time. Who knows what Yeshua will say? Maybe Yeshua will say, disappear or something. So the Yam Suf said, I better hedge my bets. I'll split so Yeshua doesn't bother me. That's how Rabbi Cheskel. And then, furthermore, very often in Shas, you find that people got very nervous when miracles happened. Right? The Gemara says, don't put yourself in a makom sakhan. Don't endanger your life. Right? In other words, let's say, if you're going across the Brooklyn Bridge, don't jump off. Don't jump off. Right? You're getting good advice now. Don't jump off the bridge. Why? So you say, why? I'm a Baal Bitachon. I have trust in God. If I'm supposed to die, I'll die. And if I'm not supposed to die, nothing will happen to me. The Gemara says, no. First of all, who says a miracle will happen? And even if a miracle happens, says the Gemara, it takes out of your spiritual bank account. In other words, if God performs a miracle for someone, it comes at a cost. People may want miracles, but a miracle costs mitzvos. If Hashem performs a miracle for someone, it may take away all their mitzvos. So the Ben Yehoyada asks, oh really? A miracle takes away mitzvos? It's menakeh from someone's zechusim? So then why were the Amoram? If you look in the Gemara, the Amoram had a field day with miracles. This guy they brought back to life. That guy, right? By the way, in the times of the Gemara, if you started up with your rabbi, with your Amora, he would give you a bad look, right? And then you became a pile of bones, right? Or, if you look in the Gemara, one guy comes to his Rebbe. He said, Rebbe, I don't like the way my wife looks. So Rebbe said, what's her name? So he said, her name is Chana. So the Rebbe said, Chana should be beautiful. And she was beautiful. But then the guy came back, yeah, but now she wants to buy nicer clothing and I don't have money. So the Rebbe said, what do you want me to do? Say she should be ugly again. And that's what happened. It's a Gemara, Masechta Tainis. And then the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says they came to the Rebbe and the Rebbe said, they said to the Rebbe, Rebbe, my brother-in-laws, they're harassing me. They're bothering me. They're very wealthy and, they want me to go to all these parties and they're annoying me. So the Rebbe said, what's their name? He said their name. They should become poor. And they became poor. The next day he comes back to the Rebbe and said, yeah, but now they're collecting money from me. So the Rebbe said, okay, let them become rich again. I mean, you look in the Gemara, the Amoron were performing miracles, left and right. Left and right. For an Amor to perform a miracle, it's like us, flipping a coin. They could do whatever they want. Why weren't they afraid that by performing these miracles, it would take away from their merits? Says Ben Yoyada, no. For an Amora to perform a miracle, it's not a miracle. He controls the Bria. He's not overriding nature. He has been given the remote control over the world. If he presses the button and the sun should set, and it sets. It's not a miracle. He controls nature. For Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elyashiv, that's what the Gemara quotes, to say this lady should become beautiful, it's not a big deal. He just, puts in the program. He says whatever he needs to do. We can't reveal right now, right? He does what he needs to do, and she becomes beautiful. And then he brings this person back to life, and he kills that. It's nothing. It's not menakeh from his zechus and ben Yael. This says because Hashem gave over the running of the world to the tzaddik hador. Okay, one last addition before we come to a tremendous, innovative concept, and that is how exactly do the tzaddikim, the Tamei Chachamim, how do they have the mastery over a creation? What's the mechanism? What's the mechanism with which these Tamei Chacham, these tzaddikim are able to change nature? So we mentioned a number of times in the Shiur here. Mentioned 2 years ago Parshas Vayetze, and 2 years ago, right before Pesach, that there's an idea of Istakel ba'iraisa ubara alma. God looked into the Torah and He created the world, which means the Torah is the blueprint of the world. It's not that the miracles of Mitzrayim happened and then it's reported in the Torah. No, just the opposite. Because they're in the Torah, that's the blueprint with which God made those miracles. So the Avnei Nezer says, fantastic idea. The Avnei Nezer says, we know that Talmidei Chachamim, if they want, could they say, violate the Torah? Yes. As a one-time Hayra Asha, like Eliyahu and Hara Carmel, where you're now to bring karbanos outside of the Beis HaMikdash, as a one-time dispensation Hayra Asha, Talmidei Chacham could say, violate the Torah. Okay, right? They could be Oiker Davar Min HaTorah. For example, on Rosh Hashanah, that falls out on Shabbos, Chachamim say, don't blow shofar. Even though the Torah says blow shofar, Talmidei Chachamim say, the tzaddikim say, don't blow shofar. Says the Avnei Nezer, imagine if you had architectural plans to build a house, and the architect took out of the plans the den. So if the den has been removed from the plans, there is not going to be a den in the building. It's not in the plans, the builders are not going to build it. So if something could be removed from the Torah, which is the architectural plan, certainly it could be altered and changed and removed from creation. So if tzaddikim, tamei chachamim are able to be oiker davar min ha-Torah, they're able to remove something from the Torah, they're able to alter the Torah, so to speak, on a temporary ad hoc basis, then certainly they are able to change creation. Because creation is merely a reflection of the blueprint of the Torah. Okay. Now we come to a tremendous idea. And this comes from the Sefer Leshem, Shavai, V'Achlama. What is the Sefer Leshem, Shavai, V'Achlama? The Sefer Leshem, Shavai, V'Achlama is a Sefer of Kabbalah. It's almost completely incomprehensible to the layman and to the scholar alike. It was written by, you have a picture of Shlomo Elyashiv, right? Everyone should have a picture of him. You know, you look at him, he's like a Malach Hashem. Rav Shlomo Elyashiv, the author of the Leshem, he lived from 1841 to 1928. I'll tell you one thing about him. The Chafetz Chaim, right? You ever hear of the Chafetz Chaim? In his home, it's not like he had like 30 Gedolim pictures hung up on the walls of his home, right? In the house of the Chafetz Chaim, there was a picture of only one Gadol b'Yisrael. Rav Shlomo Elyashiv hung in the home of the Chafetz Chaim. Okay, so that's who we're talking about. This is someone the Chafetz Chaim would tell his Talmidim, go look at Rav Shlomo Elyashiv in this world, because in the next world, you'll be too far away from him to see him. Rav Shlomo Elyashiv had a daughter by the name of Chaya Moshe. Chaya Moshe had no children for many, many, many years. For 17 years. And she would constantly be crying and crying that she was not blessed with children. One time, she did not want to disturb her holy father and her holy husband. So she went out into the field to cry. The Leshem, who's learning, overhears his daughter crying. And he goes out into the field and says, why are you crying? She says, I wasn't blessed with children. He said, why are you crying in the field? She said, I didn't want to disturb your learning. He says, I promise you in 2 years you'll be blessed with a child that will illuminate the world with Torah. Who was that? Rav Yosef Shalom Elyashiv, the Gadol Hadar. So this is, now Rav Elyashiv, when he was a young man, now listen to this. Rav Shalom Elyashiv could not move his right hand. He almost was powerless, could not move his hand, unless he was writing over his Kabbalah. And then Rav Aryeh Levine writes, he saw eyewitness when the Baal Leshem would write over, his hand would move like a typewriter. That's what Rav Aryeh Levine writes. The Baal Leshem would not let anybody record any of his chidushim and Kabbalah except for Rav Yosef Shalom Elyashiv, his grandson, when he was a young boy, and when he was a teenager. The amazing thing, at his kvura in Har HaZeisim, Rav Aryeh Levine, he said he was there. He said at the time of the burial, a rainbow came down in Hashamayim, and an emanation of light shone down on the place of the Baal Leshem. That's what Rabbi Levine writes. Okay, so we're talking about one of the brightest lights in the last many years. He was an expert in the Kabbalah of the Vilna Gaon. You see, in Lorianic Kabbalah, the Kabbalah of the Arizal, there are many different interpretations of the Kabbalah Arizal. Many people said that Rav Shlomo Sharabi, to the Kabbalah Arizal was like Torah Sheba'al Peh to Torah Shebachsav. That was the authentic interpretation of the Kabbalah Arizal, and the Baal Leshem disagreed. He said, no, there are other many interpretations. He did not feel that that was the only way to understand the Kabbalah of the Arizal. And he is bothered by the following question, and this is quoted in other Sfarim as well, and it's amazing how in a Sefer, which is really completely incomprehensible, there is a few pages that are what we call B'derech Nigla, are in the revealed realm of the Torah, and it's just such a shining light on many aspects of our history. And he says like this, fine, I get it, he says. There's a difference between before the Torah was given, after the Torah was given. For Moshe Rabbeinu to split the sea, it was hard. For Yeshua ben Nun, it was easy. For Pinchas ben Yair, it was easy. But it says the Baal Leshem, it almost seems like it was easier for Pinchas ben Yair than it was for Yehoshua ben Nun. Because Yeshua ben Nun, he had to come with the Aron and step all the Kohanim into the Yarden, and then it split. And Pinchas ben Yair just said, split, otherwise you're dead meat. And he says, if you look through the Gemara, it almost sounds like that the Amoram had a field day with miracles. For instance, he says, Chananya, Mishael, Azariah, yeah? They jump into the fire. And it's a big deal, a major miracle. They jumped into the fire. Now, did they offer to jump in? No. They were forced. Nebuchadnezzar threw them into the fire. And it was a tremendous miracle. And they, according to some of the people who were thrown into the fire, they had to run away because of the ayin hara. It was an unheard of miracle. And yet, if you look in Shas, there was someone by the name of Reb Zera. You know what Reb Zera said? Reb Zera said, I don't want to be subject to the fires of Gehenna. So I'm going to purify myself. And I'm going to test myself every 30 days. I'm going to jump into fire and see if I'm burned. So every 30 days, Reb Zera jumped into a fire and nothing happened to him. So 1 second. Chanani, Mishael, Azariah, they do it once and we make a big, tara about it. And Reb Zera, he does it every Rosh Chodesh. And nobody was forcing Reb Zera to do it. He did it on his own volition. And then remember Mar Ukva and his wife, they gave tzedakah to an ani, and they didn't want the ani to know who was giving it to them. So the ani figured it out. So the ani starts running after them. What do? They jump into a fire to hide. And the Gemara says, no big deal. And then you have Rabbi Chanina ben Doisa. There was this big serpent, and it was eating people, killing people. Chanina ben Doisa says, take me to the serpent. So he goes to the serpent, he puts his leg on the serpent, and the serpent drops dead. Chanina ben Doisa says, what are you, afraid of a serpent? Serpents don't do anything. Sin does something. Don't be afraid of the serpent. And the Gemara doesn't say, they made a big parade for Rabbi Chanina ben Doisa. For Rabbi Chanina, it's just like, all in a day's work. And says the Baal Leshem, look throughout Shas. For Pinchas ben Yair to split the Yam Suf, it's easy. Then he says, talk about Tchias HaMesim, reviving the dead. How many instances of reviving the dead do you have in Chumash? 0. Nobody revived the dead in the whole Chumash. How many times in Tanakh? You only have 2 people who revived the dead. Eliyahu and Elisha. And even Eliyahu and Elisha, you think it was easy? By Eliyahu, he had to lie down on the child, like mouth-to-mouth resuscitation with his eyes on his eyes and his mouth on his mouth, and he had to measure himself over the child, and he had to close the door, and he had to pray. And Elisha also, he had to sneeze, and he had to breathe 3 times. It wasn't easy for them. And yet, the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that there was a Tana. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah there was a Tana by the name of Rabbi. And Rabbi had a student. And Rabbi tells us, Antoninus is going to come learn with me. So just, accompany Antoninus in the tunnel. That remember we learned about it, Parshas Toldos. Antoninus came to learn with Rabbi. And Antoninus would bring a slave with him. And one time the Tana who was serving Rabbi noticed that Antoninus' slave died. So he said, what am I going to do? So he brought him back to life. So what does Antoninus say to Rabbi? He says, Rabbi, I know that every single Tana has the ability to bring the dead back to life. The Gemara uses a lashon like this: Yadana dezuti deispachu mechayim esim. Every Tana. By the way, there's a tradition. Any rabbi who's mentioned in the Gemara could be mechayim esim. And if you look throughout Shas, Rabbah brought back Reb Zera, Reb Yochanan brought back Rav Kahana, Rabbi Chanina ben Chachinai brought back his wife. Basically, what happened is Rabbi Chanina ben Chachinai, he went to learn Torah for 12 years. His wife didn't know what happened. His wife thought he was going Wednesday night to the Shiur. He comes back 12 years later, and she was shocked, and she died. So the Gemara says he didn't know what to do. Chanai ben Chachinai said, "This poor lady, she's waiting for me for 12 years." So he says, "You know what? Come back to life." So she woke up. He didn't have to, do any kind of breathing exercises and eyes on the eyes and measure himself. He just did it. So how could it be that for these Tanoim, they were Mechayim Esim like nobody's business? Avram Avinu didn't do it. Yitzchak didn't do it. Yaakov didn't do it. Moshe didn't do it. No one in Tanakh did it. Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, Yecheskel, Daniel, Hanai, Mishal, nobody did it. And comes along these Tanoim that we never heard of, and they were Mechayim Esim like you wake up in the morning. Why? And then he says, let's talk about the rain. Eliyahu Hanavi brought famine. He stopped the rain. Remember? So then, Eliyahu Hanavi wanted to be Mechayim Esim. Hashem said, you want to stop the rain and be Mechayim Esim? No, you got to pick your, one or the other. And yet the Gemara says about Ameimar, I mean, how many people here heard of Ameimar? Right? If you learn Gemara, everybody knows Ameimar. Ameimar said, if not for the fact that the world needs rain, I would abolish the concept of rain. What do you mean you abolish the concept? Who are you to abolish the concept of rain? Elio couldn't do it, so who's Ameimar to say, I'm going to abolish the concept of rain? Or if you look right, the Gemara mentioned before, Yitzchak ben Elyashiv. His Talmud didn't like the way his wife looked, so he made her beautiful. Then she was too beautiful, he made her ugly. Then the family was too wealthy, he made them poor, he made them rich. Right? The Gemara says about a different person, he was having trouble with his relatives, so he went to his father's grave. His father, out of his grave, grabbed a hold of the people in the cemetery and, schlepped them until they were going to bug off. So it almost seems like, says the Leshem, that in terms of making miracles, yes, post-Torah was easier than pre-Torah. But why is it that in the times of the Tanoim and the Amoraim, they seem to have a greater ability and capacity to change nature than even the Nevi'im? Says Rav Shlomo Elyashiv, an amazing concept. You ready for this? Ready for this? He says like this. Who is greater, the Nevi'im or the Tanoim and Amoram? Certainly the Nevi'im were greater. Right? The Gemara tells us in Masechta Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud, Im Rishonim b'nei Malachim, if the early ones were like angels, then we are b'nei Anashim, we're like men. This is what the Tanoim and Amoram say. And if the early ones are like men, Anu kichamoyrim, we're like donkeys, says the Gemara, but not like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, not that good. We're like, regular ferrets. We're like regular donkeys. Or the Gemara says in Eruvin, if the hearts of the Rishonim are like a palace, right? The hearts of the Nevi'im, they were open like the most expansive palace. And our hearts, say the Tanoim and Amoram, are like the hole of a needle. Says the Gemara, the early ones, compared to us, their fingernails were better than our stomachs. Now what does that mean? Right? A fingernail is the most unimportant part of the human body. You cut it off, it grows back. You cut it off, it goes back. What's the important part? The stomach, right? It houses the vital organs, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the lungs. Says the Gemara, the Tanoim and Amoram said, that their fingernails are better than our stomachs. And beyond that, in the times of the Nevi'im, the Shechina was present. In the times of Tanoim and Amoram, the Gemara says in Yuma, the Shechina was gone. They didn't have prophecy. So if you want to know who's greater, Nevi'im or Tanoim and Amoram, the answer is the Nevi'im were far greater than the Tanoim and Amoram. But says the Baal Haleshem, it is miniflois tamim deim. It is one of the mysteries of God. That for some reason, that we don't know why, God selected the Tanoim and Amoraim to do what? To reveal to the world the oral law, the Torah Baal Peh. The Mishnayos, the Gemara, the Tanoim and Amoraim were entrusted to be the torchbearers, to be the innovators, to reveal, to be Megala, the oral law. Mishnayos, Gemara. With what does one gain mastery over creation? The Torah. What is the Iker Torah? What is the primary component of Torah? Torah B'chsav or Torah Baal Peh? The Iker Torah, the main Torah, the more important Torah is the oral law. So even though we don't really know why God selected the Tanoim and Amoram to be the ones to reveal, to bring down, we don't know why God selected Abai, Rava, Ravina, Rav Ashi, Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish, over Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, and Yechezkel. We don't know why. Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, and Yechezkel were greater than Abai and Rava. They're greater than Rabbi Akiva. But it is, for some reason, God selected these people to bring down to the world Torah Baal Peh. And along with Torah Baal Peh comes the keys to the universe. Therefore, they were able to change nature much more than the Nevi'im, than Yeshaya, than Yirmiyah, than Yechezkel, than Yeshua ben Nun, than the Treyasar, than Daniel, than Mordechai, than Esther. You know why? Because the Nevi'im were still part of Torah B'chsav. And Torah B'chsav is vital, is important, and that's why the Nevi'im were able to change nature more than Moshe before the Torah was given. But for some reason, God in His infinite wisdom, selected, like the Baal Leshem says, La kol zaman va'es. We don't know why certain times in history God chooses to reveal certain things to the world. Let's say in the 1500s. Do we understand why God selected the sages and Sfas to reveal Kabbalah to the world? And you read stories about them and the mysterious things they did and the miraculous things they did. Why did God reveal it to them and He didn't reveal it 2,000 years earlier? We don't understand why. La kol zaman va'es. God selects certain times. Only He knows why. But if we see that God chose Rabbi Akiva, Rav Meir, Rav Tarzain, Rav Gamliel, all the Tanaim, Rabbi Huda Hanasi, and then Abaye and Rava and Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, and all Ravina and Rav Ashi, and all the Amoram. God selected them to bring down to this world Torah Sheba'al Peh. Along with Torah Sheba'al Peh, God says, the keys are yours. The keys are yours. You want to bring people back to life? It's up to you. Bring them back to life, no problem. You want to kill people? No problem. You want to make people look different? You want to make people disappear? You want to make the Yam Suf split? You want to stop the rain, make it rain, make the sun disappear? It's all yours. But what do you mean? Yeshua ben Nun couldn't do that? Yeah, you got it. Yeshua ben Nun couldn't do it because Yeshua ben Nun was not the one who brought down Torah Shabbat. He was the torchbearer of Torah Shabbat. Says the Baal Haleshem. Now we understand why you look throughout the pages of the Gemara. The Gemara is replete with the most stupendous miracles. Why? Because they were given authority of Torah Shabbat Peh. They were given control over the universe. Amazing, amazing concept of the Leshem Shavai V'Achlama. And he says the following. Now we understand I recommend take this home, read it over at home. Says the Baal Haleshem, why was it, a few more minutes, in the times of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the Anshe Knesset would come to God and say, Hashem, we don't like this Avodah Zarah business, idolatry, get rid of it. So God actually abolished the desire for idolatry. So Baal Hashem, what gave these Anshe Knesset the chutzpah to come to God and say, God, get rid of this Yetzer Hara? Did Avram Avinu have the audacity to come to God? God, I think Avodah Zarah is too great of a temptation to the world. Get rid of it. Did Moshe Rabbeinu ever go to Hashem and say, Hashem, get rid of Avodah Zarah? Did Yeshua ben Nun? Did Yishai? No. So what? How did they have the goal? The way he says it, Eich herhivu nafsham. How did they have the confidence to go to God and say, get rid of the Yisro for Avodah Zarah? You know why? Because when they saw that God is giving them absolute control over nature, that they could be Mechayeh Mason, they could stop the rain, they could do whatever they want, they said, you know what, Hashem, while we're at it, would it be too much to trouble you? Let's change a little bit. Let's get rid of the Yetzer Hara for Avodah Zarah. But Avram Avinu never would have had the audacity to even breach the subject to Hashem. And then says the Baal Leshem, one added thing, the amazing thing. He says, we know that Yehoshua ben Nun sanctified Eretz Yisrael, but when Eretz Yisrael was reconquered at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, the sanctity left Eretz Yisrael. Kidsha Rishayna Kidsha L'Shaita, Beloi Kidsha Liyasid Lama. And Ezra comes into Eretz Yisrael in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, and he sanctifies the second Beis HaMikdash. And what? Kidsha L'Shaita V'Kidsha Liyasid Lama. How could that be? Who's greater? Yoshua ben Nun or Ezra? Of course Yoshua ben Nun was greater. Yoshua ben Nun was almost as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. So how could it be that Yoshua ben Nun was only able to sanctify Eretz Yisrael temporarily, and Ezra was able to sanctify Eretz Yisrael for all time? Says the Baal Leshem, very simple. Yoshua ben Nun was ushering in the period of Torah Shabbat. It's powerful, but not powerful enough. Ezra was ushering in the period of second Beis HaMikdash. Second Beis HaMikdash ushers in the period of Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the Tanaim and the Torah Shabbat Peh. The Kedusha of the Torah Shabbat Peh is an eternal Kedusha. Kidsha L'Shaita, V'Kidsha L'Asad Lava. So we have to understand, what we're learning from here is that with the sealing of the Shas, that was the end of the period of Torah Shabbat Peh. And that was the end of the ability for the Chachamim to change nature like water. But nevertheless, even today, when a person is involved with the learning of the Torah, he has to understand that what you're involved in is not some kind of intellectual discipline, some kind of ancient document. This is something that literally controls all the universe, even to the point where Hashem says, you twist my arm. You are like a horse to me, right? You're schlepping me. Your actions, your achievements, the direction that a Jew takes affects Hashem. We say every morning, Tenu Oiz Elokim. If a Jew is conscientious about his mitzvos, he is giving strength to Hashem to bring more blessing to the world. And if a Jew is weak in his mitzvos, what does the Chumash say? Tzur Yoladcha Teshi. You, so to speak, make God weak. So the questions we need to ask are not, why is God yes doing this or not doing this? It's not Him. It's us. So Hashem says, the keys of the universe, they are in your hand. I give it to you. So Hashem says, it all dependent on us. Rabbi said,
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.